Kevin Nash's 8-second squash victory over Bob Backlund at Madison Square Garden was supposed to launch the next great WWF champion. Instead, his year-long reign became such a commercial disaster that it nearly ended his main event career before it really began. House show attendance plummeted, pay-per-view buy rates dropped, and critics tagged him among the lowest-drawing champions in company history. The man who was supposed to be the next Hulk Hogan was instead becoming wrestling's biggest flop, and what happened next would shock the entire world. Kevin Scott Nash was born on July 9, 1959, in southwest Detroit, Michigan. This wasn't some suburban paradise. We're talking about inner-city Detroit in the 1960s, where kids learned to be tough just to survive walking to school. Nash grew up in a working-class family where his father, Robert, worked hard to provide for Kevin and his mom, Wanda. Life seemed pretty normal for a Detroit kid until tragedy struck when Kevin was just 8 years old. His father died suddenly, and everything changed overnight. Now, you might think losing a parent that young would crush a kid's spirit, but Nash says it did the opposite. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, he decided he was going to be the man of the house. His mom, Wanda, had to work multiple jobs just to keep the lights on, so Kevin learned real quick that nobody was going to hand him anything. He started working odd jobs around the neighborhood as soon as he was old enough to push a lawnmower. This wasn't some character-building exercise his parents made him do. The family needed the money. What's crazy is that, despite all this hardship, Nash was actually a great student. The guy pulled straight A's in school while working part-time jobs and shooting up like a weed. By high school, he was already 6'8" and dominating on the basketball court at Detroit Catholic Central High School. College scouts were showing up to watch this big kid who could actually move and had a decent jump shot. Nash wasn't just some clumsy giant taking up space under the basket. He had real skills and the grades to match. The University of Tennessee came calling with a basketball scholarship, and Nash jumped at the chance. This was his ticket out of Detroit and into something bigger. He packed his bags and headed south to play for the Volunteers in 1977. For the next few years, Nash was living the college athlete dream. He was starting center on a Division I basketball team, getting a free education, and proving he belonged on the court with some of the best college players in the country. The kid from Detroit was averaging double digits in points and rebounds, helping Tennessee reach the NCAA Sweet 16 and showing he could handle the pressure of SEC basketball. But then things went sideways with his coach. Nash and head coach Don DeVoe started butting heads over playing time and strategy. The tension escalated after DeVoe blamed Nash for a game loss, leading to a heated confrontation where DeVoe grabbed Nash's jersey. Nash responded by open hand slapping the coach and walking away from the team. Just like that, his college basketball career was over. Nash wasn't ready to give up on his hoop dreams, though. He took his talents overseas to Germany, signing with the Jason 46ers to try making it as a professional player. This was the 1980s, so American players heading to Europe wasn't as common as it is now. Nash figured his size and skills would translate well against international competition. For a while, it looked like he might actually make a decent living playing basketball in European leagues. Then disaster struck again. Nash tore ligaments in his knee during a game in 1981, and that was it for his basketball career. No surgery in the world was going to get him back to the level he needed to compete professionally. Just like that, all those years of training and dreaming were over. Nash found himself back in the States with no clear direction and a bum knee to boot. So what does a 6'10" former college basketball player do when his athletic career ends? Nash enlisted in the U.S. Army, but they all taught him something about dealing with difficult people and tough situations. All these experiences, from losing his father to playing college ball to serving in the military, created a guy who wasn't easily intimidated. Nash learned how to adapt to new situations and make the best of whatever hand life dealt him. By 1990, he was ready for something new, something that would let him use his size and natural toughness in a completely different way. That opportunity came when WCW decided to put him in wrestling, but they had no idea they were about to waste one of the most naturally gifted big men in the business. Here was this 6'10" former college basketball player with natural athleticism and a look that screamed main event star. Instead of building around his strengths, WCW creative decided to stick him in the Master Blasters as a guy called Steel. The team paired Nash with another big guy, and they wore these matching silver outfits that made them look more like extras from a bad sci-fi movie than serious wrestlers. The Master Blasters showed early promise, and fans could see this tall guy had presence and could move better than most giants in wrestling. Nash picked up the basics pretty quickly and showed he could work a decent match even as a rookie. WCW should have recognized they had something special, but instead of learning from what worked, they decided Nash needed a complete makeover. So here's what happened next. In June 1991, WCW took Nash away from his tag team and gave him a singles gimmick that would become legendary for all the wrong reasons. Someone in the creative team thought it would be brilliant to turn Nash into a character based on the Wizard of Oz. They called him Oz and made him wear this green cape and rubber mask that covered his entire face. The entrance alone was enough to kill any credibility Nash might have built up. Picture this massive guy walking to the ring wearing a cape and a mask that looked like it came from a Halloween store. The whole thing was supposed to be mysterious and magical. Nash got to ditch the cape and mask, so that was an improvement right there. Vinnie Vegas worked with some decent wrestlers like Diamond Dallas Page and formed a tag team called the Vegas Connection. The character had Nash acting like this smooth-talking gangster type, which was closer to something that might actually. While it was better than Oz, it still wasn't really using what Nash brought to the table. The guy had natural charisma and this cool demeanor that came across even when he was stuck in these silly gimmicks. WCW creative kept trying to force him into these specific character molds instead of just letting him be himself, stuck in ridiculous costumes and cartoon gimmicks. Nash finally got to play someone who made sense. The WWF brought him in as Diesel, and right away you could tell this was different. Instead of hiding behind masks or playing some weird movie character, Nash got to be the cool, intimidating bodyguard. The character worked because it was basically just Nash being himself with the volume turned up. The WWF paired Diesel with Shawn Michaels right from the start, creating this tag team they called Two Dudes with Attitude. Now this could have been a problem for Nash's career. Being someone's bodyguard usually means you stand around looking tough while the other guy gets all the attention. Plenty of big guys in wrestling got stuck in these supporting roles and never made it out. Nash could have easily spent years just throwing people around for Michaels and never getting his own shot at the spotlight. But something interesting started happening pretty quickly. The real friendship between Nash and Michaels made their on-screen partnership feel authentic. These weren't two guys who barely knew each other trying to fake chemistry. Nash and Michaels actually hung out together backstage and got along well in real life. When they did interviews together or had segments on TV, you could tell they were comfortable with each other. That kind of genuine connection translated into believable chemistry that fans picked up on right away, and they started responding to both guys instead of just Michaels. Even though Diesel was supposed to be Shawn Michaels' muscle, fans were paying attention to the big guy too. Nash's natural charisma was finally getting a chance to show through. He had this laid-back attitude that came across as genuinely cool instead of trying too hard. When Diesel walked to the ring, he moved like he owned the place. He wasn't rushing around or getting all worked up like a lot of wrestlers do. The guy just had this presence that made people take notice. Crowds started responding to Diesel's cool demeanor pretty much immediately. Here was this massive guy who didn't need to yell or act crazy to be intimidating. He could just stand there and look dangerous. When other wrestlers tried to mess with Shawn Michaels, Diesel would step in and handle business without making a big show of it. Fans appreciated that kind of no-nonsense attitude. The cheers started getting louder whenever Diesel got involved in matches or segments. Behind the scenes, something even more important was happening. Nash, Michaels, Scott Hall, Triple H, and Sean Waltman were forming a They looked out for each other's careers and made sure they all got good storylines and opportunities. The clique was basically changing how wrestling worked backstage. As months went by, it became obvious that Diesel was ready for bigger things. The partnership with Michaels was supposed to be about getting Shawn over as a singles star, but Nash was getting just as many reactions from the crowd. When Diesel eliminated 7 guys in less than 20 minutes at the 1994 Royal Rumble, fans were cheering for him even though he was supposed to be a bad guy. That bodyguard character. After the steroid trial and some other issues, the company needed fresh main event talent. They were looking for big guys who could carry storylines and sell tickets. Nash was proving he could do both of those things, even while playing second fiddle to Shawn Michaels. What made Nash's transformation from supporting player to potential main eventer so impressive was how natural it felt. The guy wasn't struggling to find his character or figure out how to connect with fans. Diesel worked because it was just Kevin. The WWF brass were starting to see championship material in their bodyguard. And by late 1994, they were ready to make a move that would shock the wrestling world. That move came at Madison Square Garden on November 26, 1994, during what looked like a routine house show. The WWF had set up what seemed like a standard championship match, getting his shot at the big prize. Bob Backlund was known for his methodical, technical wrestling style and matches that typically went 15 to 20 minutes. He wasn't and submission holds. So when fans bought tickets to MSG that night, they were expecting a decent wrestling match between the technical veteran and the rising big man. The build-up to this match was pretty minimal compared to major pay-per-view events. This was just a regular house show, so there weren't weeks of promos and storyline development leading up to it. Most people figured Backlund would probably retain the championship after a hard-fought match where he showed why he deserved to be champion again. So here's what actually happened when these two guys got in the ring. The match started normally enough, with both wrestlers feeling each other out like you'd expect. But then something completely unexpected occurred. Within just 8 seconds of the opening bell, Diesel had pinned Bob Backlund and won the WWF Championship. 8 seconds. Not 8. That building saw this coming, including the wrestlers in the back who were probably watching on monitors. This wasn't some fluke finish where someone got caught by surprise. The immediate reaction and booking strategy mirrored what had happened with Hulk Hogan about 10 years earlier. Just as Hogan crushed the Iron Sheik in 1984 to capture his first WWF Championship in a quick, wanted fans to see this big, cool guy as their new superhero who could handle any challenge that came his way. This victory was supposed to launch Diesel as the next great WWF champion and the face of the company's new generation. Vince McMahon had been looking for someone to fill the void left when Hulk Hogan departed for WWE. His size, charisma, and growing popularity made him seem like the perfect choice to be their new top babyface. The excitement around Diesel's potential was real after this title win. Wrestling magazines started featuring him on covers and talking about how the WWF had found their next big star. The company began planning storylines, and Madison Square Garden made Nash the WWF champion and positioned him as the company's next big thing. The 8-second victory sent shockwaves through the wrestling world and established Diesel as someone fans needed to take seriously. The WWF brass were convinced they had their new Hulk Hogan, and Nash was ready to prove he belonged at the top of the card. But what seemed like a fairy tale beginning would soon face some harsh realities that nobody at the WWF was expecting. Having the championship and all the right booking was just the beginning of the challenge. The reality of running a wrestling company meant those numbers couldn't be ignored for long. Kevin Nash was living every wrestler's dream as WWF champion, but the financial metrics were telling a very different story. On paper, everything looked perfect for Diesel's championship reign. He had the look, he had the charisma, and fans were cheering for him at live events. The WWF was pushing him as their top babyface and giving him all the opportunities that come with being the company's chosen one. Nash got to main event pay-per-views, work with the biggest names in the business, and have his face plastered all over WWF merchandise and promotional materials. But here's the thing about wrestling that a lot of fans don't realize. It doesn't matter how cool a wrestler looks or how much potential they have if people aren't buying tickets to see them. The wrestling business runs on cold hard numbers, and those numbers were painting a pretty ugly picture of Diesel's drawing power. House show attendance started dropping during Nash's championship reign, and this wasn't just a small dip that the company could ignore. We're talking about significant decreases in ticket sales at live events across the country. Wrestling companies make a huge chunk of their money from house shows because they run these events almost every night of the week. When attendance drops at house shows, it hits the company's bottom line immediately. The WWF was seeing smaller crowds at venues where they used to pack the house. Wrestling newsletters were reporting specific examples of the decline, with arenas that would normally sell 8,000 or 9,000 tickets now struggling to get 6,000 people through the door. That might not sound like a huge difference, but in the wrestling business, those missing ticket sales add up fast. Pay-per-view buy rates were telling the same disappointing story. The WWF's monthly pay-per-view events were supposed to be their biggest moneymakers, and Diesel was headlining most of them during his championship run. But the buy rates weren't matching the company's expectations or the levels they had seen with previous champions. Wrestling fans were apparently not interested enough in seeing Diesel defend his title to spend their money on pay-per-view events. Keep in mind that this was that had hurt their reputation. They needed their new champion to be a proven draw who could bring in revenue and help stabilize the business. Instead, they were watching their box office numbers decline month after month with Diesel as their top guy. Wrestling insiders started talking about Nash's reign in pretty harsh terms. The dirt sheets and wrestling newsletters were reporting that critics were tagging Diesel among the lowest drawing champions in company history. Now that might sound like an exaggeration, but the numbers backed up what these wrestling writers were saying. The financial metrics during Nash's championship run were genuinely disappointing compared to what the company had seen with other champions. Here's a specific example of how bad things got for Diesel's drawing power. House shows that featured him as the main event were consistently selling fewer tickets than shows where he wasn't the headliner. That's a pretty clear indicator that fans weren't showing up specifically to see the WWF champion. When wrestling fans aren't that invested in the character, it usually shows up in the attendance figures pretty quickly. All this commercial failure was starting to hurt Nash's confidence and the WWF's faith in their chosen champion. Vince McMahon and the other executive as Diesel, the harsh reality was that he wasn't connecting with casual fans the way a successful champion needed to. This commercial disappointment would soon lead Nash to make the most controversial decision of his entire wrestling career. But what fans didn't realize was that Nash wasn't making these decisions alone. Behind the scenes, a tight group of friends was already working to change how the entire wrestling business operated. Nash, Michaels, Scott Hall, Triple H, and Sean Waltman weren't just casual friends who happened to work together. This group formed something wrestling had never seen before, a tight unit that traveled together, partied together, and most importantly, looked out for each other's careers. Most wrestlers back then kept to themselves or had one close friend at best. The clique was different because they operated like a business partnership disguised as friendship. What made the clique so powerful was the star power they represented. Nash was the WWF champion, Michaels was one of the company's top stars, and Hall was a proven main event stars. When you put that much talent together in one friend group, it creates serious backstage influence. Wrestling companies need their top stars happy, so when those stars start making suggestions about storylines and booking decisions, executives tend to listen. The friendship between these 5 wrestlers started. What really showed how the clique operated differently from other wrestlers happened on May 19, 1996, at Madison Square Garden. After the main event was over, Nash, Hall, Michaels, and Triple H did something that broke every rule in the wrestling business. They hugged each other in the middle of the ring while fans were still watching. This might not sound like a big deal, but it was absolutely huge for wrestling. This moment became known as the Curtain Call Incident, and it shattered kayfabe in a way that wrestling had never seen before. For those who don't know, kayfabe is basically the wrestling term for keeping the storylines and characters believable, even when the cameras aren't rolling. Wrestlers who were Nash and Hall were getting ready to leave the WWF for WCW, so this hug looked like a goodbye between friends who worked for competing companies. Wrestling fans weren't used to seeing behind the curtain like this. The whole thing felt disrespectful to the business, and showed fans that a lot of what they were watching was just guys playing characters. Nash and Hall were already leaving for WCW, so the company couldn't really do anything to them. That left Shawn Michaels and Triple H to face the consequences. Michaels was too valuable as the company's top star to punish severely, so most of the heat fell on Triple H. He got buried in storylines for months as punishment, while Nash and Hall walked away without any real consequences. This whole situation created serious resentment among other wrestlers who saw the clique getting special treatment. Other talent started feeling like these 5 guys were holding them back or preventing them from getting opportunities they deserved. The group's reputation for looking out for their own interests first started hurting how other people in the business viewed them. All this backstage influence made the clique powerful, but it also made them polarizing figures in wrestling. People either loved them for being smart about the business or hated them for putting friendship above everything else. Serious leverage in contract negotiations and storyline discussions, but it also painted a target on his back. This backstage influence would soon help orchestrate one of the most shocking moves in wrestling history, as Nash and Hall prepared to make a decision that would change the entire wrestling landscape forever. When Hall and Nash signed with WCW, they weren't just switching jobs. They were walking into guaranteed contracts that offered creative control, a percentage of merchandise sales, and money that dwarfed what the WWF could provide. You want a war? This wasn't some planned invasion angle that wrestling companies usually did. Hall wasn't playing a character from another wrestling promotion. He was Scott Hall, the guy who had been working for the WWF just weeks earlier, and now he was showing up on WCW television without any explanation. Here's what made Nash and Hall's jump to WCW so controversial in the first place. These weren't just any wrestlers switching companies. Nash had been the WWF champion. The negotiations happened in secret, and neither wrestler told the WWF what they were planning until it was basically too late to stop them. This kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering was pretty rare in wrestling back then. WCW's offer was unlike anything wrestlers had seen before. We're talking about guaranteed contracts with serious money, creative control over their characters, and a percentage of merchandise sales thrown in on top. The WWF couldn't match those terms, especially after Nash's disappointing championship run had hurt his value in their eyes. So Nash and Hall made the decision to jump ship and see what they could accomplish with their new company. The financial blurred the lines between what was real and what was scripted. Hall didn't come out with some new character name or gimmick. He was just Scott Hall, formerly of the WWF, standing in a WCW ring and talking about starting a war. Wrestling fans weren't used to seeing this kind of direct acknowledgement of the competition between companies. Most of the time, wrestlers who switched promotions got new names and pretended their previous careers never happened. The anticipation for Nash to show up as the second outsider was building every week after Hall's debut. WCW kept teasing that Hall had a partner coming, but they didn't say who it was or when he would arrive. Wrestling fans who followed the backstage news had a pretty good idea it would be Nash, but seeing it actually happen was still electric. When Nash finally showed up on the June 10th episode was the real friendship between Nash and Hall. These guys had been close friends in the WWF. They were part of the clique together, and their chemistry was obvious on screen. When they talked about taking over WCW together, it didn't sound like two actors reading lines. It sounded like two buddies who had made a plan and were ready to execute it. That kind of genuine connection is impossible to fake, and wrestling fans picked up on it immediately. The fan reactions to the Outsiders' invasion were unlike anything wrestling had seen in years. WCW Nitro's television ratings started going up because people wanted to see what these guys would do next. House show attendance improved when Nash and Hall were advertised for events. Wrestling magazines were putting them on covers and talking about how the Outsiders were changing the entire wrestling business. This wasn't just another storyline that would run for a few months and be forgotten. Keep in mind that wrestling in 1996 was getting pretty stale before the Outsiders showed up. The WWF was struggling with their new generation era, and WCW was doing the same old stuff with guys like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. The Outsiders brought something fresh and unpredictable to wrestling that fans hadn't experienced in a long time. Every week, people were tuning in to see what chaos Nash and Hall would cause next. Then came Hulk Hogan's shocking heel turn at Bash at the Beach on July 7, 1996. When Hogan leg dropped Randy Savage and revealed himself as the third man joining the Outsiders, it completed the formation of the New World Order. This wasn't just another wrestling stable getting formed. The NWO became something that went way beyond just wrestling fans, and Nash found himself at the center of the hottest storyline in the business. What happened next transformed wrestling television forever and made Nash one of the most recognizable figures in sports entertainment. The New World Order wasn't just a wrestling storyline, It became a cultural phenomenon that put WCW on top. WWEHOF became this rebellious group that felt different from everything else in wrestling. They wore black and white, they acted like they owned the place, and they didn't follow the normal good guy versus bad guy rules that wrestling usually stuck to. Nash became the NWO's enforcer pretty much right away, and his role was perfect for what he brought to the table. While Hulk Hogan was the leader and did most of the talking, Nash was the guy who backed up their threats with action. His size and presence made him the perfect muscle for the group. When the NWO wanted to send had worked so well when he was Diesel. What made Nash's NWO work so effective was how he blurred the lines between reality and storyline. He delivered key backstage promos that felt completely unscripted, talking directly to the camera like he was having a real conversation instead of reading wrestling dialogue. The NWO also ran these black and white paid advertisements during WCW programming. Promos never could. The Monday Night Wars started heating up in a serious way once the NWO got rolling. Throughout late 1996, WCW Nitro consistently beat WWE Raw in the television ratings, which was huge for a company that had been playing second fiddle to the WWF for years. Wrestling fans were switching channels to see what the NWO would do next instead of watching whatever the WWF had planned. This wasn't just happening once or twice. WCW was winning that proved WCW actually drew money and generated fan interest. Companies make serious money from merchandise too, and NWO shirts were flying off the shelves at wrestling events. Fans wanted to wear the black and white and show that they were part of this rebellious movement. Nash's role in the NWO made him more successful than his WWF championship run ever did, and the difference was obvious to anyone paying attention. As Diesel, Nash had been the company's chosen champion who couldn't draw money or connect with casual fans. As part of the NWO, Nash was one of the most popular wrestlers in the business and a key part of the hottest storyline in wrestling. The contrast couldn't have been more dramatic. This success was changing the wrestling business model in ways that would affect the industry for years to come. Wrestling companies started realizing that edgy, realistic storylines worked better than the family-friendly approach they had been using. The NWO proved that fans wanted wrestling that felt more adult and sophisticated, not cartoon characters fighting over silly disputes. Nash had gone from WWE's biggest disappointment to WCW's biggest star. But success in wrestling never lasts forever, and even the hottest storylines eventually face challenges that can destroy everything they built. By the early 2000s, the man who had helped revolutionize wrestling was watching his world crumble around him. The NWO storyline that had made Nash one of the biggest stars. So here's what happened that really showed how bad things had gotten for WCW, and Nash's role in making it worse. Nash became the company's booker in late 1998, which meant he was making decisions about who won and lost matches. At Starrcade 1998, Nash booked himself to end Goldberg's undefeated streak and win the WCW World Championship. This move looked terrible to wrestling fans who could see that Nash was using his backstage power to put himself in the main event picture. The guy who had once been part of wrestling's hottest storyline was now seen as someone who cared more about his own success than what was good for the business. Keep in mind that injuries were really starting to limit what Nash could do in the ring during this time period. All those years of taking bumps and working matches had caught up with his body. Nash wasn't moving as well as he used to, and his match quality was suffering because of the physical problems he was dealing with. The guy who had once been this athletic big man was struggling to keep up with the demands of professional wrestling. Instead of being the guy who could carry a match and make his opponent look good, Nash was becoming someone who needed other people to work around his limitations. WCW's financial problems were making everything worse during Nash's later years with the company. The promotion was dealing with serious money issues and declining revenue that made it hard to compete with the WWF. When a wrestling company is struggling financially, it shows up in the quality of the shows and the talent they can afford to keep. WCW was cutting costs everywhere they could, and it was obvious that the company was in serious trouble. When Nash returned to WWE in 2002, his second run with the company showed just how much his body had deteriorated. His limited in-ring appearances made it clear that he couldn't handle a full-time wrestling schedule anymore. Nash did have a program with Triple H in 2003 that reminded people of what he could still do when he was healthy. But these moments were becoming rare exceptions rather than the normal standard. The physical toll of wrestling was ending Nash's full-time career earlier than anyone expected. Nash turned out to be much harder than Nash during the Monday Night Wars. Watching the promotion collapse while he was still working there must have been frustrating for someone who had helped make WCW the #1 wrestling company in the world. The constant reunions and reformations of the NWO failed to bring back any of the magic from the original. Nash's later career perfectly illustrated how the physical demands of professional wrestling strive for 100 years of luck. Until next time.